My name is Bingo and I'll be your moderator. On behalf of the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness and Performance, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, where our speaker will be discussing her work with using accelerometers to estimate overhead postures. Before we jump in, I'd like to announce that this meeting will be recorded and transcribed. This ensures that those unable to attend can still benefit from the valuable discussions and insights that will be shared today. Additionally, in case you need the closed captioning feature, I'd like to point out that you can click the 3 dots at the top of your Teams screen and you should see an option to turn on live captions. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home.
At Conestoga College, we would like to acknowledge that in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and Brantford, we are located on the Haldimand Tract. This land promised to the Haudenosaunee people of 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on,
and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land for thousands of years. CISWP is committed to making Canadian workplaces productive and sustainable by collaborating across disciplines. Our aim is to position Canada as a global leader in empowering businesses to thrive in a competitive economy. We focus on improving workforce safety, wellness, and performance through research, knowledge transfer, and workforce development. By closely working with our stakeholders, we conduct innovative research, create evidence-based tools and services, and we address knowledge gaps in the field. Our presenter for today is Dr. Cristina Herrera. Dr. Herrera specializes in clinical and shoulder biomechanics, focusing on understanding and preventing musculoskeletal injuries. At the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness and Performance, she oversees data collection, processing, analyses, and interpretation for various research projects using advanced equipment like electromyography and motion capture systems. Dr. Herrera holds degrees in physical education, physical therapy, human performance, and has a PhD in kinesiology with a focus on clinical biomechanics. Her expertise includes identifying injury risk factors and developing targeted exercise programs for injury prevention and recovery. Now, while we've received some questions beforehand, we strongly encourage you to continue asking questions during the webinar in the Q&A section. You can ask questions here anonymously, but just be mindful if you happen to reply to someone else's questions, you won't be anonymous. Rest assured though, all of these questions will be addressed either during the session or afterward, depending on time constraints. Should people wish to continue the conversation after this webinar, I'll be sharing ways to connect with the speaker in the post-webinar email, where you'll be able to reach out and to connect. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Herrera.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Beam, for the presentation. And I am really excited to be here with you guys, and I'm gonna share a little bit of our work at CISWP. What I'm gonna share today is the validation of tri-axial accelerometers in the lab, but also in the field, and some model considerations for using these devices in the field, for estimating, in this case, overhead work. Okay, so overhead work is a major risk for shoulder injuries in construction workers. Wearable tracking sensors are commonly used for this purpose, but however, they face several limitations. These limitations are related to connectivity issues, to compatibility with PPE, and also with setup time. The tri-axial accelerometers are inexpensive, are unobtrusive, and they had no widely used in the field for full-day and multi-day collections. So the position can be estimated. However, we haven't fully validated yet in the lab and in the field. There are several mathematical models to estimate position from the accelerometer data shown in the literature. These are the 3 main common ones. So we have the trigonometry model with when we can estimate the position between the angle from the upper arm and the gravity vector. So we use some Pythagorean theorem to estimate this. There is also this scalar product model where the angle can be estimated by the intersection between the x and y tails. And also we have the single axis model, which is basically a linear regression model based on the position of the y vector on those three positions, as you can see, hopefully in the screen. So the purpose of this research, as I mentioned before, was to validate this tri-axial accelerometer to estimate overhead work, but also to validate the accuracy of these models. And we validated against motion capture systems, which is the gold standard, against some very common wearable devices used in the field, and also against field standard observations. So the way that we did this, so we have for study 1, we have the gold standard validation. So against Vicon motion capture system, we use 13 participants for this purpose. For study 2, we validated against Xsense, which is a common wearable device, and 12 participants took part of this study. And for study 3 is a single case of a construction worker in an 8-hour shift. And he uses the accelerometer, and we use observations as well. So for the study 1, the validation against lab gold standard, we have the instrumentation. We use the tri-axial accelerometer. We use the ActiWave, and it was placed on the lateral part of the upper arm, and we collected the data at 100 hertz. So we use these calibration pulses to calibrate the equipment. So for the Vicon motion capture system, we use 10 cameras collected also at 100 hertz, and the upper extremity were placed on several body locations following the International Society of Biomechanics standards. We also place clusters on the chest, on the low back, in the forearms, and in the arms. The experimental task for the study 1 consisted of drilling into a wooden platform for 2 seconds, where the participant had to drill with the shoulder elevated at 150 degrees, with the shoulder elevated at 90 degrees, lunge position, and kneeling positions. So for the data processing, in terms of the accelerometers, we low pass the data at 1 hertz, and we use the 3 axes of the accelerometer for the analysis. For the Vicon motion capture system, we estimated the angles based on the X, Z, Y sequence, and we use second-order Butterworth at 6 hertz of cutoff frequency. So we run correlations and also a statistical parameter mapping between the accelerometer outputs and between the Vicon motion capture system outputs. And the model that performed the best we tested the 3 models that I initially introduced earlier, and the model that performed the best was selected for the studies 2 and 3. So the results show stronger relations between all the models and the Vicon outputs, except for the kneeling condition. So as you can see in the screen, we have an R-squared values of above 0.7 for the 90 shoulder elevation at 90 degrees, shoulder elevation at 150 for the lunge position, but not for the kneeling position. In terms of the statistical parametric mapping, we see that for the shoulder at 90 degrees of shoulder elevation, the trigonometry and the scalar model performed the best when we didn't find any significant differences between both, between the accelerometer outputs and the Vicon. For the 150 elevation, the trigonometry model performed the best. For the lunge position, all models were not significant between accelerometer and Vicon. And for the kneeling position, the trigonometry model was the only model that was not different between compared to Vicon. So that led us to, okay, so the trigonometry model out of the 3 models was the model that performed the best overall. So we use this model for studies 2 and 3. So for the study 2, we validated the tri-axial accelerometer now against a wearable device that is commonly used in the field, which is X-Sense. So we placed a set of X-Sense on the upper extremity, following the configuration of the software, the upper body, no hands, and we collected the data at 100 Hertz. So we did an end-post calibration followed by a 10 seconds of dynamic movement calibration. So the experimental task consisted of a standardized hammering and drilling task with having the participant to perform at 150 degrees of shoulder elevation, at 90 degrees of shoulder elevation, kneeling, and lunge positions. So for the data processing, we performed the same analysis in terms of the tri-axial accelerometer as the same as study 1. And for the X-Sense, we took the ergonomic angles following the set Y sequence extracted from the software. And we performed correlations between the X-Sense outputs and the trigonometry accelerometer model outputs. So we found strong correlations, but these correlations were only noted in the 150 degrees of shoulder elevation for both hammering and drilling conditions. There were not meaningful correlations for shoulder elevations at 90 degrees for the lunge and for the kneeling conditions. Finally, for the study 3, we used the accelerometer and we placed it in the same location, the same spot as study 1 and 2, on a person during an 8-hour shift. And we followed this participant with a camera while the participant was performing the daily routine task at work. So we monitored the participant and we split all the data from the accelerometer and from the observations on 30 minutes intervals. And then in those 30 minutes intervals, we calculated the duration and the frequency the participant was doing overhead work. And then we ran a pair t-test to compare the outputs from the accelerometers and the outputs from the observation. As you can see in the results, the frequency was not significantly different. So there was no significant difference in the frequency compared the accelerometers versus the observation, but the duration was different. So the accelerometer did a better job on estimating the frequency of overhead work. So what does it mean, the implications of this? So according to what we saw in the findings, we can tell that the shoulder elevation orientation can be accurately estimated using the tri-axial accelerometer. Good estimations are possible, especially in upright positions. We have to be very careful when the participant is bending the trunk forward, because the outputs of the accelerometer tend to be underestimated. So future data collection might help by adding an additional accelerometer in the chest, which is something that we actually validated after this study. So we did a follow-up study here when we validated the chest, the tri-axial accelerometer placed in the chest against a Vicon motion capture system. And the participant was grabbing a t-shirt from the ground and they were placing it on a platform in front of them. And we use, as I mentioned, Vicon motion capture system and the accelerometer placed on the sternum. And we ran SPN analysis between both outputs. And the good thing, as you can see in the picture, there are no differences in torso flexion from the accelerometer estimations compared with Vicon. And this is very, very accurate. So this could be a potential solution to use in the field to account for this main limitation on when the participant is bending the trunk forward. So which method is better for you? You have to ask yourself, what is your main goal? What is the purpose of your collection? If you want to collect multi-day or full-day collections, maybe the tri-axial accelerometers are a good solution for you. You have to keep in mind that the trunk flexion, as I said before, might underestimate the angle. So you might want to use other alternatives, such as accelerometer in the chest, for example. If you want to capture, however, maybe a full body assessment, wearable devices could be a better solution for you. A limitation for this, as we mentioned, is the electromagnetic interference and the connectivity issues. If you have a low budget and you cannot afford this type of devices, observations can be also an alternative for you. And the cons is that this is a 2D assessment, and the participant might get occluded by all the things that happen in the field, right? Because it's not, we can barely have like a straight image of the participant sometimes, and you have to take this limitation into account. Okay, so thank you so much, and I'm open for any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Herrera. Please have a seat.
Yes, thank you.
Presentation. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Dean.
So we do have some questions that were sent in initially. I do urge the audience, if they have any questions that they have, I'm giving them time to process the presentation that they just saw right now. The Q&A section at the top of your screen, you can click it. You can choose to post a question anonymously if you do want to ask, or you can just ask it straight up and not leave it anonymous. But let's jump into the first question that we saw. You've outlined some limitations with using accelerometers to estimate posture. Are there any other limitations or difficulties that you found with using accelerometers?
Yes, I think that so the main limitations that we found, as you mentioned, Ben, is when the trunk is forward. So that it's kind of like, okay, you have to take into account that the accelerometers, in this case for the shoulder, can underestimate the angles.
Yeah.
But also, there is another limitation related to rapid movement. So sometimes, maybe, I don't know if you're able to see in the screen, but sometimes when you are hammering, in the hammering task, when you're like performing something very fast, the accelerometers tend to have an erratic behavior as well. But fortunately, we have some filtering solutions for this. Some literature show that a low-pass filter at 15 hertz can be an appropriate solution to account for these limitations. So I think that, yeah, it's good stuff, and we can continue moving forward with this alternative.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay, and then in your studies, is there a reason you chose to add, because you did study upright postures with shoulder elevation,
Yep.
Is there a reason you chose lunging and kneeling postures with the tasks that you did?
So we wanted to account for awkward positions. What is an awkward position? It's something that it's being performed whether it's not normal, right? It's not, the participant doesn't feel right performing it. So we wanted to say, okay, what happened with the accelerometer when we do these awkward positions? So we chose the lunge and the kneeling position as an example of things that you can see in the field. And we actually found good accuracy between the accelerometer and the Vicon with the participant when the participant was in lunge position. Okay. The kneeling tends to be a little bit tricky because they tend to bend the trunk a little bit more forward.
Yeah.
So that was the one that led to more errors or underestimation.
Okay. And so speaking of underestimations, you said some of the limitations with the accelerometers. It seems that from the results that you were sharing on screen today, some of the graphs, that the accelerometers tended to underestimate the posture angles. They were a little bit under the Vicon angles. Is that almost always the case? I mean, in the follow-up study, it looked like they were a lot closer. But for the shoulder specifically, like, is it always underestimating?
Yeah, it's a little bit underestimating because you have to think that it's accounting for the gravity and the position of the trunk, of the arm, right?
Yeah.
So a little bit of the deviations from the gravity to the trunk can lead to this underestimation. However, it's not big, right? It's just, we are talking about like a few degrees of underestimation. But if you want to be very accurate and if you want to, add accuracy to your findings, you can place the accelerometer in the chest, as we show in the follow-up study, as we saw, is very, very accurate when we compare it to Vicon, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So now that you have the trunk, you can compare the trunk.
You can compare, exactly. You can subtract. For example, you choose, you go in the field, you place an accelerometer, one in the trunk, one in the upper arm, and then you can subtract. So whenever the participant is bent forward, you can subtract that angle from the chest. So you know for sure that the output that you're gonna take is gonna be very accurate.
That's awesome. And right now you've been doing this in the lab. You said you did one observation study. It looked like it was a construction worker.
Yep.
Do you think this method is only suitable for construction workers or skilled trade workers?
I think that it can be used anywhere actually. It can be used in the healthcare. Of course, if you have something like a field that you have more standardized tasks, for example, automotive task, that would be automotive industry, that would be very suitable. But even for these, for the observation that the construction worker was performing all the tasks, so it was moving around, performing the daily activities, we found that it was accurate enough. So I will say that you can use it in anywhere where you want to quantify for these exposures, right? And shoulder exposures, it's something that is very, very important, given all the amount of shoulder injuries that we see, and related to these to the overhead work. So I think it can be used on diverse fields.
Nice, I love it. Okay, and so you showed a follow-up study.
Yep.
The follow-up study was a step. What are your next steps with using accelerometers and being able to observe the field?
Yeah, so the next steps, which is already that we are doing right now, we are trying to go in the field, and it would be nice to kind of like characterize each trade. What are the exposures related to each specific trade, which is something that we can do with this equipment. And this is just an example, as I mentioned, of the shoulder. But my colleagues are doing other type of, are using the accelerometers in the chest, are using the accelerometers in the low back. So we can quantify exposures on basically the whole body, which is really, really nice.
Nice. Okay. How would this method be adapted, so within construction workers, if they're using like vibrating tools, things that like, or if they're sitting in a car and there's like a lot of vibrations? How do you think we would be able to adapt your model?
I think that this is kind of like related to the limitation that I discussed before. So we know that the accelerometers have this erratic behavior and rapid movement. This might include hammering tasks, but also vibration or like that type of task that you are referring to. So I will say that you can use the device, but you might have to account for that by filtering options. So fortunately, we have those options that we can decrease that vibration, and we can just focus on the signal of interest.
Okay, so we can use the filters to take out the high frequency vibrations.
The high frequency, yes.
Just so we can focus on low frequency angles. Awesome. All right, so a lot of talking about using the accelerometer. One question was about why not use electromyography to estimate trunk flexion? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah, that would be another alternative. If you think about it, okay, I can account for whenever the trunk is being forward by, I don't know, by an EMG muscle activation. That would be a solution. The only thing that I can see is the connectivity issues related to this. So if you think about, if you go in a construction site and you have to collect, I don't know, you have a building and the participant is on the fourth floor, and like it's kind of like it's very hard to track for when we are doing this type of assessments.
Yeah.
So because of the connectivity issues related to the construction site, so that's kind of like the main disadvantage of using wearables, EMG, like wearable EMG.
Yeah.
So it's a solution, but I think that depending on the environment that where you are collecting the data, if you are in a more controlled environment, you can use EMG. It takes also a lot to process.
Yeah.
So you have to take into account that as well.
Yeah.
So I feel like it would be more suitable maybe to use an additional accelerometer instead of the EMG.
Nice. And then you were talking about like if the participant's on a different floor or anything like that. These accelerometers, are they wired? Do they send out data like to a receiver? Like how did these ones work?
So basically we collect is wearable, and we collect everything on the SD card. So once the collection is over, we just put the device into a box, and we can extract the information from the device. So it doesn't need to be connected or wired or anything in the moment that you're performing the collection, which is great. So the person can go anywhere and you don't have any that fear of losing data or like participant getting occluded by anything or like electromagnetic interference. So I think that's pretty like a good advantage.
Nice. All right. And I guess another question that just came in. Observations can be extremely expensive on the country, depending on the country that the practitioner is working in, especially if they have to buy these accelerometers. How would you justify using like these accelerometers as a direct measure, as opposed to your third method, which was using like a video camera and looking at it in 2 dimensions and estimating the postures visually?
Yeah, I think that so for the observations, you need someone first. You need human resources to go to the field and to record that person. So a person needs to be there for 8 hours. But then you need a person to look at the video for 8 hours to see, okay, where the participant is doing the overhead work, where it's not. So it takes you longer time. So it's, in terms of even like resources, human resources, I'll say that it's even more expensive than maybe just buying one device. I know there is a bunch of, it's like a coding associated with this, but after you figure that out, that portion, so it's not gonna take you much time. So it's way more effective and even cheaper, right? It's a cheaper alternative, I think.
Yeah, just on that note, because I was trying to understand like how much this does cost. We were looking up the price of the sensors. Each one, each single sensor is about $350 Canadian.
All right.
Which is a lot, but like you said, would you rather have, like you need a few sensors, so that's going to be a cost up. But you can put it on the participant, you said, and just leave it. You don't need to follow the person around for 8 hours in the day. And then another thing to note is, even though you will need multiple sensors, you'll need to know how to analyze and interpret the data. And obviously, I was going to mention to the crowd in the audience, if they feel the need to reach out or if they have questions in the post-webinar email.
Yes, for sure.
I'll definitely put information of how to connect with Dr. Herrera, with our team, so that we can try and help and develop the code, I guess, it would take to actually analyze the accelerometry data.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, like it would be a cost up front, $350 each sensor, but like I think, like you said, following a person for 8 hours with a video camera
is very tedious.
It's super tedious. Yeah.
You have experience on this, so you can tell us, Vin.
Yep. All right, we have a question for study 1 validation.
Okay.
Were the participants experienced with the positions and construction tools? If not, would you think experience would influence your methods validation?
So actually, these participants didn't have experience. We have some of them, they did have experience with drilling and hammering, but some of them didn't. So sorry, it was just drilling for study 1. So some of them they did, some of them they didn't.
Yep.
It could benefit more. So if you think about like, we have reliability, so we found accurate results with a pool of participants that didn't have experience in drilling. So I imagine that if we have people that come with experience, it could even help more to our cause, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that
It'd be
would
more
be
consistent.
I think so. It will be more consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that question.
That's a good question. Thank you.
I can give another minute or so for anyone else who wants to ask a question. But other than that, also to remind the audience as well, this whole entire webinar will be transcribed and will be recorded, and we'll be putting it up on YouTube in a week or two for people to view in case you missed it or if you came in late. And then if you have questions, like I said, I'll put it in the post-webinar email for everyone to reach out. So nothing's coming in. I think it's quieted down. Thank you so much, Dr. Herrera, for joining us. And thank you everyone at home.
Thank you, everyone.
For joining us. Have a lovely day.
I hope you enjoy it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.